I thought that maybe this was a political statement. Now that I
Right.
read your title, it says, "Can we all just get along?" But really, it's not about politics. It's not about what's going on in our country at large. This is about farm neighbor laws, which probably, I guess, in some respects, could be just as divisive as we see our current political state out there in the country. So, Peggy, you are always one of the most popular speakers that we have on the virtual stage. Well, you are a popular one because you're on a virtual stage, but on the actual stage at Farm Science Review, usually people flock to hear these legal updates. So this year you chose to talk about farm neighbor laws. And what do you actually mean by farm neighbor laws?
Right. Just defining that term is a bit challenging, but I'm really looking at those laws that affect that relationship in a community where we have neighbors, and especially where at least one of those neighbors is a farm. And so, what are the laws that address how the farm and non-farm neighbors coexist, or alternatively, where several farmers coexist? We do have many laws. Most of them are statutory laws enacted by our legislature that lay out some rules for how we're all expected to behave in those situations.
So do you see when it becomes neighbor issues, is it common to be farm on farm crime, or is this farm versus non-farmer landowners? When we get conflicts between neighbors, what do you think?
I don't think there's more of one than the other. I think it goes in phases, though. There can be some periods where suddenly we're having a lot of non-farm issues. But right now it feels pretty evenly balanced, where we're seeing issues between farmers and non-farmers, but also a lot of issues between two farmers. So right now it feels pretty balanced.
Pretty balanced. So when you talk about conflicts that are going back and forth between neighbors, what are some of the common ones that you're seeing or that you get questions on? Of course, you're getting questions from all over the state of Ohio on legal issues from us out in the extension offices, but what's the major ones with farmers that you're getting?
I think right now, I would say the top three are noxious weeds, drainage, although right now drainage is not such a big deal given the weather lately, and zoning, specifically agritourism and wedding barns. Those three right now are the biggest. Now, line fences are always there, those kind of boundary disputes. Those are most always there. And then nuisance would be another big one, but right now that hasn't been at this point in time as big an issue.
So when you talk about neighbor fence laws, we're getting that a lot. There was a change a few years back in that. It used to be we get this question a ton about, it used to be the fence was a financial responsibility 50-50 between the two parties. Is that has changed, right, Peggy?
It has, unless you have an agreement in place that would have kept that old rule, that old law applicable to your situation, or you took some action to try to preserve that law. But otherwise, now the rule is that the person who wants to have the fence is responsible for building it, or if it's a pre-existing fence, then we go by an equitable shares rule, David, which is just an attorney's heyday because we get to argue about what's fair. So we decide what's fair and then we allocate responsibility according to fairness.
Now we get into these conflicts, uh, and I think most folks hate conflict, but what kind of tools do we have to help landowners resolve conflicts like this?
Right. And, I said a lot of these laws are statutory, and some of them do have solutions built right into the statutes. For example, line fence law has a complaint procedure. And so the landowner that feels that something needs to be done or is upset with a neighbor can file a complaint with either the township trustees or the Court of Common Pleas. The same with noxious weeds law. We have a procedure there where that person who is worried about noxious weeds on someone else's land can follow those procedures, can notify the landowner and or the township trustees. And that is supposed to resolve the situation. So that's one positive thing about all these conflicts that can arise, is that we often do have a little bit of a procedural mechanism built into the laws that address them. And so knowing that and following that might be what actually resolves the problem.
And that's good. And it's a great reminder, because Stan asks, again, just if you have questions, just drop them in the Q&A and we'll try to answer them live here. But Stan, thanks for checking on. Stan, who used to be our moderator extraordinaire, all the way from Pennsylvania. Stan Ernst asked a question. Stan, it is great to hear from you. Yes. What are the main nuisance issues showing up right now? If you had nuisance complaints, what are those nuisance things that we're seeing?
So I can't answer that without saying that for years, Stan used to ask me on this very stage whether he was what we call an attractive nuisance under Ohio law. So he just thought that was so funny, and he's probably getting to that again this time, isn't he? But the nuisance activities, Stan, have changed since when you used to do these interviews with me. You know, we went through a long period of livestock nuisance type concerns. I think now we are in what I would call an agritourism nuisance phase. And a lot of the nuisance complaints that I hear are noise-based or traffic-based from agritourism operations that have event facilities, wedding barns, something like that. That right now is our #1 nuisance complaint that I hear about. And I haven't heard much lately about livestock nuisance. And so a new phase, Stan, surprise. I think that's, let me think if there are any others lately that no, I would say it's largely the agritourism problem that I've been hearing about for about the last year or two.
Great, and Stan just comments, thanks. He's looking for more ammo to torment students with. The wedding barn one shows up to east of you too. So over in PA, the wedding barn issue is becoming a point of contention between neighbors who are living out in the quiet country, and next thing you know, you have a wedding going on next to your goat pasture.
Yes, it's been very prevalent in Pennsylvania as well as Ohio. And there was a good case out of Pennsylvania, Stan, that I'd be happy to tell you about if you want to know more about that. And we just had one here in Ohio too, an appeals court case about agritourism and what can qualify and what we can do out there, can or can't do, that might affect neighbors who aren't expecting those kinds of activities.
I guess, Peggy, my question would be, bottom line, how do we get along? Or what are some strategies on how can we just get along? Right. And maybe I could put those out on Facebook so everybody would know what they are. So
right. I think first is, and I'm probably biased in this way, but I think it's important to know the laws and the rules that you're dealing with. I still sometimes have to work pretty hard to convince some people that what they think is a law is really not a law. So it's good to stay updated and current with what the actual laws are in a situation. And then I think second, of course, you know, we've heard about it for years, good communication. It's true. Just having good communication with the neighbor, understanding what's going on each other's property, talking about that. Sometimes the mysteriousness or the lack of information can actually escalate a conflict. And that I've just seen that happen so many times, where either they don't know the law or they don't really know what's going on. And then I think beyond that, if there is a problem and we know the law, we know the situation, but we really need a resolution, maybe bringing in a third party who can help mediate that situation. I mean, that might be an attorney, but it also could be, you know, a trusted friend, someone who's looked up to in the community, an actual professional mediator, someone like that who can help you figure out how to resolve the problem in a way that everybody can live with.
And we got a question that popped up through the feature as well here is about how can zoning be part of this, I guess, the solution or to set expectations. Um, what are your thoughts on zoning? And the comment was made, you cannot zone out agriculture. Who defines agriculture?
Right. Well, it is, the agriculture is defined for zoning purposes in the Ohio Revised Code. So there is a statutory definition of agriculture, and agritourism is part of that. There's actually an additional definition for agritourism, but we do have that clearly defined for purposes of zoning in Ohio, and that's the definition we would look to. But as the listener pointed out, we have what sometimes I refer to as that great big agricultural exemption from zoning that really gives agriculture a lot of leeway to continue to exist. And so I think changes, when it comes to wedding barns, for instance, changes would have to come through new statutory law that might better define or better deal with that situation. But that broad exemption in Ohio zoning law right now does, to a large extent, allow some of these, these wedding barns that are out there that are causing some conflict. So it's a difficult one. It takes change in the statute, and that's sometimes very hard to accomplish.
Now, Peggy, we heard rumors that you're working on a handbook that might help in this neighbor relationship area. Do you want to explain a little bit of that?
Yes, yes, I'm working on a project right now with the National Ag Law Center, and it will be an Ohio Farm Neighbor Law handbook. And then it will also be given out to nearby state stands. So I'll give it to Ross Pfeiffer over there at Penn State, and Ross will adapt it for Pennsylvania. And I'll give it to other partners across the country. But we're setting the framework, and we're going to, of course, fill it with Ohio law. But we have pulled together all of these different farm neighbor laws, and we're going to explain what the law is, give some actual instances of how it applies, and recommendations for handling those conflicts that can come up in those situations.
So when that comes out, and maybe this will lead into my next question, you have a whole plethora of resources that people can to access, because you're getting questions all the time in different legal areas, whether it be food safety, fence line law, these neighbor issues that we have. Can you explain a little bit more about where will that be, and then also how they can access that?
Yes, I don't hear the word plethora often, David. It's just a nice word to pull out every now and then, isn't it? But so all of our resources are on farmoffice.osu.edu. And even though this is a project I'm doing for the National Agricultural Law Center, it will be hosted on our site, but it'll also be on nationalaglawcenter.org. And those are all freely available resources. We are able to put out a lot of those due to funding from USDA through the National Agriculture Library. So they host the resources as well, but the easiest place to find them is farmoffice.osu.edu on the Ag Law Library.
And we can see that has been put into the chat by Julie. Julie, we appreciate that you put that in the chat, farmoffice.osu.edu, ag-law-library. So you can, and also while you are there, you can subscribe to the blog, and automatically every time the Peggy and the Ag Law Center put some information out, you will automatically get it right to your emails.
Right. I do try to blog out those new resources that are available. And hopefully this Farm Neighbor Law Handbook will be ready by the end of the year. It's a pretty large undertaking, so it's taking us a while to get through and make sure we're covering all the topics we want to cover, but hopefully by the end of the year.
Are there other things that might be working through the legislature that you would want to tip us off that maybe not be in the neighbor?
Well, there is one actually in the neighborhood. I was happy to see just this week they finally revived the what we call the purple paint law, and that is boundary disputes are one of the problem areas between neighbors. Just knowing where boundaries exist, where you're allowed to go, trespass issues, trespass signs. Well, for some reason, the Ohio legislature has examined this purple paint law several times, and they just let it die every time. Well, finally, this session here, in the end of it, they've picked it back up. And so what that legislation would do is it would allow a landowner to mark their property boundaries using purple paint. And that purple paint has to be at a certain height and a certain, a certain width so that it is obvious, visible to others. And that then marks the boundary of a property. And so that becomes important where maybe we have a trespass issue between neighbors that would more clearly mark the boundary than a sign would, a no trespassing sign. Those signs are subject to poor weather, to vandalism, to cattle. There's a lot that can happen to those signs when they're put up. And so we would replace that signage requirement, especially for purpose of a criminal trespass, with a purple paint marker. And so they are now re-examining the purple paint law, and they might actually push it through before the end of the year.
That would be great. That would be great.
Yes.
Peggy, again, remind us how we can find resources or people can contact you if they need to get more information.
Yes, on farmoffice.osu.edu. That's our website. And David has some good information there as well. He shouldn't give me all the credit. I have my Ohio Ag Law blog there and my Ag Law library, but we also have access to the Ohio Manager blog. We have a wealth of farm management resources. We have marketing resources. Everything you would do in your farm office, we try to put it in the farm office and have resources available for that.
Great. Peggy, as always, we appreciate the work that you do here for our farmers in Ohio. And we'll be seeing you back on this stage later this week. So we'd like to thank you for everything that you do for OSU Extension.
Oh, you're welcome. Nice talking to you.